Char Aznable. He is the most lethal ace pilot of the One-Year War, the man who racked up Zeon's highest kill count and destroyed Federation warships at the Battle of Loom before Federation brass had even finished briefing their own commanders, and who became one of Zeon's most celebrated warriors before the war was half over. Born Casval Rem Daikun, son of Zeon Zum Deikun, the Republic of Zeon's founder, whose assassination at a Zabi orchestrated political rally when Casval was 11 years old, forged a hatred so absolute it would burn across the entire war. He eliminated those who could connect him to the Daikun family line, he protected his secret identity at every turn, and when Garma Zabi proved more useful dead than alive, Char deliberately fed him bad intelligence and watched a Federation ambush cut him down as Garma's plane fell toward enemy lines. The Red Comet's war record is a masterclass in ruthless pragmatism dressed up as battlefield glory. The standard reading has always been that Char was a principled soldier undone by grief, a man of honor fighting for a cause he didn't fully believe in, whose worst impulses came from the trauma of watching his father die and his family scattered. His participation in the war's most devastating operations, his respect for worthy opponents like Amuro Ray, his genuine loyalty to certain Zeon officers who earned his trust, all of it fits that picture. He wasn't a villain in the traditional sense, the argument goes. He was a tragic figure, an anti-hero whose moral compromises were the product of circumstance and the Zabi family's betrayal, not some inherent cruelty. He killed for justice, not for pleasure. He sacrificed Garma, because Garma had become part of the Zabi regime that murdered his father. Even his massacre at Loom can be rationalized as a military operation, not an act of personal sadism. The boring explanation cannot hold against the body of evidence. Char was not killing to avenge his father. He was killing to clear his own path. Every elimination of a Federation officer who recognized him was preemptive, surgical, and designed to protect the secret identity that allowed him to operate inside the Zeon military. Every political maneuver, framing Garma's death as Federation treachery, positioning himself as Garma's avenger, seizing command of the fleet, moved him closer to the power base he needed to finish what he started. The man who meticulously cultivated the Red Comet persona while secretly hunting Zabi family members was not acting from grief. He was acting from a decades-long campaign of calculated revenge dressed as military service, and every honorable choice he made served that larger design. The Red Comet was never fighting for Zeon. He was fighting through it. Ramba Ral. If Char Aznable reshaped the war from the command bridge, Ramba Ral reshaped every individual battlefield he touched. A lieutenant who turned entire Federation sectors inside out with nothing but a prototype mobile suit and a mind built for tactical devastation. The Blue Giant. Every Federation soldier stationed in the 08th MS Team's theater knew that name before they knew their own commanding officers. His MS-07 goof were extensions of a genius tactician's will, and he used them to systematically dismantle Federation positions across the Earth's surface, ambushing supply columns, flanking entrenched forces, picking apart coordinated assaults before the Federation pilots even realized they were fighting a single enemy and not a coordinated Zeon division. He was one of Zeon's finest pilots, regarded as a genius tactician by both his own commanders and his Federation adversaries, and he was, without exaggeration, one of the Earth Federation's most formidable foes. Ramba Ral, Zeon Zum Deikun's closest friend, was Ramba's father, and that household reverence for the Daikun family grew into the man who would make the Federation pay for every inch of ground they held in Asia and the Pacific, hunting through jungles and deserts with a precision that made him legendary on both sides. And here is where he becomes something the rest of this list is not. Every other ace pilot on this roster fought with the full weight of Zeon's atrocities behind him. The colony drops, the poison gas attacks, the deliberate targeting of civilian populations. Ramba Ral never lost his compassion. He refused to target civilians. He treated prisoners with genuine respect. He showed clear, documented care for his own enlisted men, and they would follow him into impossible odds without hesitation because they knew their commander valued their lives. His men were not expendable units in a calculus of strategic advantage. They were people he had sworn to protect, and he meant it. That restraint made him a better pilot, not a worse one, because every tactical decision was filtered through a commitment to minimizing loss of life, which produced choices that Federation analysts could not predict using standard military modeling. Ramba Ral's arc traces directly back to Ramba Ral's relationship with Zeon Zum Deikun. Ramba Ral was a longtime friend of the Republic's founder, which means Ramba Ral grew up in a household that revered the Deikun family and their vision for a spacenoid future free from Federation oppression. When Zeon Zum Deikun was assassinated at that rally, killed by Zabi operatives disguised as Federation sympathizers, the Ral family's grief was personal, not ideological. Ramba Ral joined the Zeon military not because he wanted to conquer Earth, but because he wanted to honor his father's friend's legacy, and his service record reflects a man who genuinely believed he was fighting for a just cause. The origin frames this connection explicitly, showing the depth of that loyalty and the tragedy of what it cost him, and the original Mobile Suit Gundam anime and its sequel films layer on his arc with one of the most emotionally devastating confrontations in the entire Universal century, a genuinely honorable man dying for a regime that had long since abandoned the ideals he thought he was defending, facing opponents he would have respected under any other circumstance. The question that hangs over his entire story is whether his compassion actually meant anything. He was a brilliant tactician and a beloved commander who refused to let the war strip away his decency, and he died fighting for a government that had deliberately murdered his father's closest friend, that was dropping colonies on Earth, that was poisoning civilians and executing prisoners. He never seemed to grapple with the moral weight of what Zeon had done, never paused to ask whether his loyalty to the Zabi cause was worth the millions of deaths that cause had produced, never questioned whether the father's friend he was honoring would have wanted anything to do with the regime that murdered him. His compassion made him extraordinary among the aces of the 1-year war. It also made him complicit in a war of conquest that killed tens of millions, and the canon never asks him to answer for that. Black Tri-Stars. If the previous pilot could claim compassion as a mitigating factor, a man fighting for a cause he believed in, leading his men with loyalty, refusing to target civilians, these three have nothing. Miguel Gaia, Ortega, and Mash. 3 interchangeable pilots in matching black uniforms, deployed as a single unit with no individual weight, no backstory, and no conscience. Their official designation was the Mobile Assault Force 7th Division 1st Mobile Suit Battalion Command Affiliated Special Duties Squad, and they were formed in May UC 0076 under Colonel Kycilia Zabi's Mobile Training Battalion as Zeon's elite mobile suit response team, hand-picked, rigorously trained, and deployed wherever the situation demanded an immediate, devastating answer. They were not soldiers in the conventional sense. They were a specialized weapon system with 3 operators, and Zeon treated them exactly like one. Deployed for high-value targets, redeployed as the war effort required, recycled into whatever role the war demanded. Their defining moment, the only moment that ever mattered, came during the Odessa campaign, when the Black Tri-Stars deployed their 3-man synchronized combat tactic against the RX-78-2 Gundam. The technique was elegant and brutal, close-range coordination that neutralized Amuro Ray's new-type reflexes before he could react, overwhelming the Gundam's defenses through perfectly timed converging fire. They captured the Gundam. They took the Federation's most advanced mobile suit off the board with a maneuver so clean it became mandatory study material in every military academy in the sphere. This single operation is the entire case for their elite status. The one concrete proof that the training Kycilia invested in them actually produced something worth the resources. The context makes that choice intelligible. Kycilia Zabi deployed the Black Tri-Stars at Odessa because they were the only Zeon unit trained to counter new-type enhanced reflexes, and Amuro Ray was the only new type in the field. Against any conventional pilot, their synchronized tactic was overkill. Against the RX-78-2, it was the only doctrine with a realistic chance of success. The unit was purpose-built for exactly this threat, which is why their brief capture of the Gundam worked. It's also why it didn't last. The moment Amuro Ray broke free and destroyed all 3 of them in the immediate counterattack, when the elite unit that had just captured the Federation's greatest weapon was dismantled in minutes by a single teenage pilot who had never seen their tactic before, the truth of what they actually were came into focus. The common assumption is that the Black Tri-Stars were among Zeon's best pilots, that their 3-on-1 capture of the Gundam proved their elite status the way aces prove themselves. The assumption breaks on the facts. They were Zeon's elite mobile suit team precisely because their synchronized tactic was designed around countering reflexes no conventional pilot possessed, which means their entire combat doctrine was useless against any opponent who wasn't Amuro Ray. They won because they were the first unit ever built specifically to counter new type ability, not because they were individually extraordinary. Their Odessa victory was the result of a tactical innovation that only worked once, and their destruction immediately afterward proved the innovation had a shelf life of exactly 1 engagement. They were specialists, who had already become obsolete before they ever drew their weapons. Kukuruz Doan. While the Black Tri-Stars operated as a disciplined, coordinated unit under direct Zeon military command, what follows is a man who not only defected from that same military but killed his way out, and took a whole new kind of ambiguity with him onto a quiet Pacific island. Doan deserted from Zeon, seized a mobile suit, and fled to a remote island where a small group of orphan children had taken shelter. There he settled in, playing protector to kids who had already lost everything, building a fragile existence far from the front lines and far from the command structure that had sent so many to their deaths. For the orphans, he was simply the man who showed up and stayed, the one adult in a world that had stopped being safe for anyone. Here is where the contradiction bites. Doan is a fugitive by any honest accounting. He deserted under fire, he killed Zeon comrades to do it, he stole military hardware, and Zeon's wanted posters never came down. He isn't some principled defector who laid down his weapons and walked away from the war. He took the war's deadliest tools with him and kept them. When Federation forces track him to the island, and Amuro Ray is dispatched to investigate, the episode sets up what looks like a straightforward manhunt. Dangerous deserter, stolen mobile suit, civilian presence. The Federation's framing is simple. Doan's story, when you actually look at the evidence, is not. And before you settle on the simpler reading, that this is just a man who saw the horror of Zeon's war and got out, consider what it would actually require for that to be true. A genuine defector abandons the military entirely. They surrender their weapons, place themselves under enemy or neutral protection, cut every tie to the military machine they fled. Doan did none of that. He killed more Zeon soldiers to escape. He retained a functional mobile suit. He ran a hidden compound on a remote island with no oversight and no accountability. Every day he stayed on that island instead of turning himself in was another day he chose to remain a fugitive combatant rather than a defector. The orphans weren't just in his care, they were his shield, whether he acknowledged it or not. The episode was directed by Yoshikazu Yasuhiko, the original series' art director and lead character designer. A story about a Zeon deserter who kills his own side, steals a machine, hides with children, and still draws Federation pursuit. That narrative doesn't resolve cleanly. There's no clean arc where Doan redeems himself, no moment where he hands over the mobile suit and walks into Federation custody, no scene that makes him a hero. The episode exists in Japanese canon but remains deliberately withheld from international distribution, and watching it leaves the unmistakable impression that Doan wasn't trying to escape the war, he was trying to outlast it on his own terms, children included. Bernard Wiseman. If Doan was a deserter operating in the margins, Wiseman is the Zeon military's attempt to manufacture exactly the kind of ace pilot the war has been eating alive, and it shows. He appears in Gundam 0080, War in the Pocket, as a member of the Cyclops team, the Special Operations Unit infiltrating a neutral space colony to destroy the Federation's NT-1 Gundam Alex. From the moment he shows up, Wiseman is loud, brash, and already selling himself as a combat veteran with more battles than he could have realistically fit into his career. The specifics pile up fast. Wiseman is a veteran, not a new transfer. His credentials are real, though the bravado he wraps around them is performance. He's part of a special operations team operating undercover in a colony populated entirely by civilians. Men, women, and children who have no stake in the war and no reason to trust any soldier. And he keeps leaning on his battlefield resume, dropping references to engagements that check out, posturing as the kind of pilot the Cyclops team was specifically assembled to provide. Wiseman pilots a MS-18E Campmer during the operation and takes part in the attack on the NT-1. The fracture running through his entire arc is the gap between the confidence he projects and the fear he carries inside. Wiseman is performing confidence because the role he's supposed to fill requires it. The Cyclops team is a special operations unit, infiltrating a neutral colony, and hesitation or doubt gets people killed, including himself. So he leans harder into the persona, he amplifies the stories, he becomes the pilot he's pretending to be, because the alternative is admitting he has no business being there, and then the Federation's prototype shows up, and the performance has to become real in the middle of a live combat situation he was never actually prepared for. That's one detail that says everything. Wiseman's Campmer is disabled and he's forced to fight on foot before he's ultimately killed in combat, outmatched by a more experienced enemy pilot. The tragedy isn't that he lost. The tragedy is that the Zeon military's entire approach to piloting by this stage of the war was to take frightened, undertrained conscripts, hand them machines they couldn't fully operate, and demand they perform as though they were veterans of a dozen campaigns. The system manufactures Wisemans on purpose. The boasting, the fabricated confidence, the desperate projection of competence, it's all a survival strategy the military itself implicitly encourages, because a pilot who believes his own stories fights harder than one who admits he's underqualified. The real problem isn't Wiseman's character flaw. It's that by UC-0080, Zeon wasn't fielding an army anymore. It was fielding a performance. Brave faces on machines nobody could properly operate, fighting a war that was already lost, because the alternative was admitting how completely hollowed out the military had become. Unnamed Zeon Grunt pilots, Earth Assault Forces. If Wiseman's failure was personal and singular, what follows is institutional. Thousands of men pressed into machines, sent to kill millions, and told they were the heroes of their own story. At the outbreak of the one-year war in UC-0079, the Principality of Zeon launched the most devastating opening offensive in military history. A colony was dropped on Earth and half the human population died in a single stroke. Operation British, a colony drop operation designed to terrorize the Federation into surrender, instead wiped out roughly half of humanity in the impact and the ecological collapse that followed. The ground invasion that followed deployed the first mass-produced combat mobile suits in human history, the MS-06 Zaku II, against a Federation that had never even conceived of a humanoid tank. Zeon's Earth Assault Force pilots were fighting with technological supremacy, ideological conviction, and the absolute certainty that they were liberating space colonies from Earth's oppression. They weren't just soldiers, they were crusaders. The details of their equipment tell the real story. The Magella attack tank was among Zeon's primary ground vehicles during the Earth invasion, but it struggled under actual Earth gravity on the kind of terrain the war forced combat onto. Zeon's military leadership knew the logistics were strained. They launched the ground invasion anyway, sending forces across the planet with vehicles that degraded faster than they could be maintained, in a war they couldn't logistically sustain. Every pilot who climbed into a Zaku II that first week was driving the finest mobile suit the world had ever seen. Every pilot who climbed into one by the third year was driving a relic, outclassed by the Federation's Gundam units, fighting a war of attrition on a planet whose conditions were slowly destroying their machines. The Zeon pilots pressed forward anyway. The Zabi family had built a cult of personality so complete that questioning orders meant questioning the family that had led Zeon to independence, and in the worldview the military had cultivated, defectors like Doan weren't tragic figures, they were traitors. Zeon propaganda portrayed Earth Federation citizens as oppressors, justifying the war, and the Zeon military system enforced loyalty and ideological commitment at every level. The steelman of the descent is immediate and sharp. Not every Zeon pilot signed up willingly. Conscription existed. Some joined for economic reasons, some because they had no choice, some because the Zeon government made the Federation look like the greater evil. And in some respects, it was. The Federation was corrupt, exploitative, and willing to let space colonies starve. Zeon's grievances were real. That's the single hardest sentence for anyone arguing that Zeon's ground forces were nothing but villains. But it doesn't hold. Grievances don't authorize genocide. Personal circumstance doesn't dissolve accountability for following orders that killed 2 billion civilians in a single afternoon. Every pilot who participated in that colony drop and every pilot who pressed the trigger afterward was operating inside a system that had already decided the calculus. Earth Federation oppression justified nuclear-level atrocity. The system is the point. The nameless Grunt isn't an exception to Zeon's evil. The nameless Grunt is its execution layer. Interchangeable, radicalized, armed with obsolete equipment they were told was cutting edge, sent to die or kill with equal indifference, and all of it working exactly as designed. The Zeon Earth Assault Forces were the instrument of Zeon's most extreme policies, and they caused staggering loss of life during the one-year war. Shin Matsunaga, the nameless grunts from the Earth Assault Forces died by the thousands because Zeon's command structure treated them as ammunition, but that isn't proof Zeon lacked elite pilots. It's proof the Zeon High Command didn't always bother deploying them. Shin Matsunaga was a Zeon ace pilot during the one-year war, famous for his white-painted mobile suit and the nickname White Wolf, a reputation that earned him his own side story in the MSVR continuity, where his fully white MS-06F Zaku II became one of the most visually distinctive machines in Zeon's arsenal. By the outbreak of the one-year war, Matsunaga had established himself as one of Zeon's most notable aces, and his signature was simple and absolute: everything white, no markings, no identification. He wasn't just winning engagements. He was curating them, choosing when and where to appear, vanishing before anyone could pin him to a specific operation, building a legend through absence as much as presence. Nobody investigated. When a Baoa coup collapsed into chaos, and the Zeon flagship began its final descent, Matsunaga simply stopped appearing in any record, friendly, enemy, or independent. Some accounts say he went down with the ship. Others say he ordered his crew to abandon him and stayed behind alone. His ultimate fate was never confirmed. Character motivation didn't matter to the record keepers. Only the result did. There's something deeply strange about a man who built an entire identity around being Zeon's most visible specter, who earned his legend through blood, who chose an unmarked machine because he owed nothing to the chain of command, only to vanish into the same void that swallowed the nameless grunts from the section before this one. His fate after the war remains undisclosed in the Universal Century continuity. The Zeon war machine consumed its most effective weapon the same way it consumed the least one, Johnny Ridden. The previous item was a man whose legend was etched into confirmed kills and battlefield reports, an ace whose existence the record books could barely contain. Johnny Ridden is the opposite problem entirely, a man who exists everywhere and nowhere, a brand name attached to an aesthetic, a red suit and a lightning nickname that fans recognize even if they can't pin down which version of the character they're invoking. The Johnny Ridden who belongs in this continuity is an elite Zeon ace pilot from the 1-Year War, a contemporary of Shin Matsunaga, with a similarly decorated combat record, and a reputation that earned him the nickname Crimson Lightning, derived from the distinctive red-painted mobile suit he carried into battle, and the combat style that surviving Federation pilots described as a streak of red moving faster than anything they'd encountered. Johnny Ridden gained notoriety for his skill and the distinctive red color scheme of his mobile suit during the 1-Year War. That uncertainty reveals how the character functions outside strict canon, as a brand name attached to an aesthetic, a red suit, and a lightning nickname that players recognize even if they can't pin down which version of the character they're invoking. Norris Packard. Where the previous item dissolved into ambiguity the moment anyone tried to pin it down, Norris Packard is the opposite kind of failure. A man whose canon record is so solid it leaves no room for confusion, and that very solidity is what makes him disturbing. Born in UC0041, Packard was a career officer in the Principality of Zeon who entered service attached to the Sahalin family, one of Side 3's aristocratic houses whose fortunes rose and fell with the war. He wasn't a Zabi heir, and he wasn't a conscript thrown into a machine he couldn't operate. He was a professional soldier who got married during his service years, whose wife's death sent him into a spiral of alcoholism that the Sahalin family pulled him out of, investing time, resources, and political capital to rebuild him as a weapon. The return on that investment was extraordinary. The man who staggered out of a bottle became one of Zeon's most reliable field commanders by the war's closing months, cold, precise, and utterly ruthless. His defining deployment came against the 08th MS Team, Shiro Amada's Federation unit operating in the brutal terrain of the Southeast Asian frontier, hunting Zeon supply lines and interfering with operations the Sahalin family had a direct stake in. Packard led Zeon efforts against the 08th MS Team and was fiercely loyal to the Sahalin family who had supported him. The 08th MS Team had experimental equipment, experienced pilots, and the full logistical weight of the Federation Army behind them. Packard was operating with limited resources in a difficult theater, yet remained one of Zeon's most effective commanders. Packard's loyalty to the Sahalin family endured throughout the conflict, as he protected their interests until his death in UC0079. Ginius Sahalin. The previous item was a professional soldier whose entire existence was a transaction. A man rebuilt by an aristocratic family and then spent as their most efficient asset. Ginius Sahalin is a different thing wearing the same uniform. He was the heir of the Sahalin family, central to its fate. Ginius Sahalin is the older of the Sahalin siblings, a rear admiral in the Zeon military whose ambitions stretched far beyond his family's traditional sphere. His project, a massive underground research facility in Southeast Asia building the Absolus mobile armor, was intended as a potential war-ending weapon. He possessed scientific knowledge, resources, and support within Zeon Command. What he lacked was any framework beyond his own ambition for what would happen afterward. Ginius's mobile armor project was driven by his ambition to restore the Sahalin name, a family disgraced in Zeon's hierarchy. His sister Aina worked closely with him on the project and came to question its purpose. Ginius's focus was on reviving the Sahalin family's standing, not Zeon's cause. Every decision, every test of the mobile armor, every engagement with the 08th MS team, every manipulation of Aina's idealism was calculated toward that single goal. Their motivations were at odds. As the 08th MS team pushed deeper into Zeon territory, Ginius's actions became more unstable and violent. He built a weapon of mass destruction and reacted with desperation when his plans were threatened. The mobile armor's reactor posed a catastrophic threat to the region in its final form. When Aina intervened with Shiro Amada to stop the weapon, Ginius was killed by a Zeon soldier before he could carry out his final plan, and the Absolus was destroyed in the resulting explosion. He made no attempt to negotiate, refusing to abandon the weapon even when confronted by his own sister. Ginius Sahalin is an antagonist whose obsession with family legacy eclipsed Zeon's cause, and ultimately consumed him.